Hello, everyone. My name is Rosie Helson, and I'm Marketing Manager at Natural Capital Partners. I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for joining us today to hear some real-life success stories and best practice examples of communicating internally and engaging staff in your climate action programs. So this webinar is actually pretty popular. We've had quite a good sign-up rate from companies around the world and quite a few different industries. So this is clearly a topic people want to hear about. We have 4 speakers today, so I'll just tell you a bit about them. My colleague Saskia Feast is based in San Francisco, and Saskia works with companies in the western region of North America, including VMware, who's also presenting with us today, and Intuit, to ensure they have access to the right mix of market-based solutions to meet their sustainability objectives. Second in the running today is Solitaire Townsend, who is the co-founder of Futerra. Solitaire has been trying to make the world a better place for nearly 30 years. As co-founder of the agency Futerra, which uses the logic of sustainability strategy and magic of creativity for positive change, she advises governments, charities, and brands like Danone, Lancome, and Vodafone. I'll just allow Saskia and Solly to say hello to everybody.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. This is Saskia.
Hi, everybody. And when I said I started 30 years ago, obviously that was in childhood.
Yes, makes sense. Me too. Thirdly, we're going to have Nadine Gudz present, who is Global Director of Sustainability at carpet manufacturer Interface. If Nadine can say a quick hello to the audience.
Hello, everyone. Very pleased to be here.
That's great. Nadine is presenting from Toronto today, and she leads and develops sustainability leadership at Interface through education, strategic partnerships, and innovative market solutions. Her current focus is on activating the company's new mission, Climate Take Back, which is Interface's plan to run its business in a way that helps to reverse global warming and create a climate fit for life. And you'll hear a bit more about that during Nadine's presentation. Finally, Natasha Tuck, Senior Sustainability Manager of VMware, will present their company's story. Natasha, if you wanted to say a quick hello.
Yes, good morning. Good morning from California. Happy to be here.
Great. We've got a few presenters from California today, a couple from London and one from Toronto, so fairly global webinar. So in Natasha's role, she has responsibility to lead sustainable operations in the Americas, the company's global carbon neutrality strategy, strategic external partnerships, reporting, and employee engagement. So as you know, this webinar is directed at busy sustainability professionals, and I think that Natasha is probably an exemplar of one of those very busy people. She is also actively engaged with VMware's efforts to deepen sustainability within their own supply chain. So those were our presenters today. Quickly back to logistics. This webinar is scheduled to last 1 hour and we'll leave around 10 minutes at the end for questions. You are all muted in listen-only mode, so please use the panel on the right-hand side of the screen to submit any questions, and we'll go through them at the end. So firstly, just to illustrate, why are we running this webinar? Well, internal engagement is essential to enable businesses to achieve climate goals, but it also helps businesses to get maximum value from their climate program. In our experience, a typical sustainability manager profile is busy, as we just talked about. They have a schedule led by reporting deadlines. They are also very passionate and very ambitious. It's also a known fact that bold climate targets, such as 100% renewable energy sourcing, reducing emissions to net zero, cannot be achieved by one person within one company. You are going to need other sign-off, data input, help and support in order to progress, and you are going to engage them enough to work towards the climate targets you have as a business. And these people you need to engage are often busy doing their own day jobs. So that's why we're running this webinar. Commonly reported challenges are convincing the CFO or the financial team of the value of climate action. Perhaps it's the marketing department of brand value, ops teams to provide energy data. However, there are solutions to these challenges. And at Natural Capital Partners, we support many companies of all sizes to achieve climate targets. And the programs can be a source of inspiration to internal staff and other stakeholders, helping to attract and retain talent and even provide inspiration and improve productivity. So with that in mind, before we begin the main presentations, we would like to run a quick audience poll. So you should see that coming up on the screen shortly. The question is, what do you find most challenging in terms of internal communication for climate action? So perhaps it's simply educating your colleagues on the basics, the meaning of climate change and the reasons behind taking climate action. Perhaps it's convincing the financial team of the financial value of taking climate action. Perhaps it's empowering colleagues to take action themselves, convincing the marketing department of the brand value, or perhaps it's engaging those in technical or operational roles. So we'll just give you an extra minute to respond. And we should be able to share the results with you shortly. A few more answers coming in. Okay, we will now share the results. Okay, interesting. So we've got quite a high proportion saying that educating colleagues on the basics, i.e. the meaning of climate change, why it's important for the business to take action, perhaps how you're taking action, is quite an important part. You know, what does carbon neutral mean? What does 1 ton of carbon mean? That type of thing. Also pretty high is convincing the CFO as well, but the highest of all is inspiring and empowering colleagues to take action themselves. Of course, perhaps they are busy with their own day jobs, perhaps they see sustainability as the sustainability manager's job only. Hopefully we'll address some of these challenges in the presentations today. So with that, I'm very pleased to hand over to my colleague Saskia, who will run through a few real-life examples of internal engagement.
Thanks, Rosie. So hi, everybody. Just to follow up from Rosie, as she mentioned, we work with a lot of clients. We work with over 300 clients in over 30 countries. So that is quite a diverse set of businesses across many different industrial sectors and a lot of different communication needs internally, and a lot of different structures of these companies. So what you can see on this slide is that not only do we have a diverse customer base, but we have a very diverse portfolio of options to meet climate and renewable energy goals. There are multiple different technologies providing renewable energy and many different project types that can deliver carbon reductions, from sequestration in forests to efficient cook stoves to clean water filters. And they're, of course, located in many different countries as well. So our role is really to understand each client's unique requirement and then design a solution that fits them, and then work with them to understand their communications and messaging and provide access to high quality support in terms of imagery, videos, technical information, and then we review and brainstorm around blogs and things that clients may have written, or web pages or press releases. So if we can go to the next slide. As Rosie mentioned, they're very busy. So what you can see on the right-hand side is what we consider to be the ABC of climate leadership. So at first, a target to achieve zero emissions, net zero or carbon neutrality, a commitment to source renewable energy, and a commitment to drive towards sustainable development. So while a ton of carbon is a ton of carbon, no matter how or where its emission is avoided, we find that companies typically find more value from their sustainability programs when they develop an approach that aligns with their core business. So there are three key approaches to this alignment. You can align around the technical or process approach to the emission reductions. You can align with a specific geography, such as organizations in your supply chain, or you can align around an impact. For example, powering people through prosperity is Intuit's mission, and they align with projects that provide access to microfinance. More about them in a minute. Another example is Taylors of Harrogate, who have supported projects that create resiliency in their supply chain. In smallhold tea farms in Kenya, they've worked on a forestry project around that supply chain. One of the things that we have found very helpful is since the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted in 2015, we've seen more and more companies choosing to align their corporate and/or sustainability strategy with those Sustainable Development Goals. It's been a useful framework for us as we have been assessing the sustainable impacts of many of the projects we work with for a few years, and having this internationally recognized, easy to translate framework provides a great communication tool and an alignment tool. If we could go to the next slide. This shows the typical internal audiences for the sustainability manager, not only their direct boss, but all the way up to the C-suite and through finance, procurement and legal operations, marketing. Recently, with some of the moves around financial disclosure to the investor community, investor relations is another internal stakeholder to talk to. And then, of course, to all other employees. So if we go to the next slide, I want to provide some examples. So the first is alignment. I mentioned Intuit. It's a business and financial software company developing sales, accounting and tax software. They've been carbon neutral since 2015, and they have a filter for selecting their programs, their carbon offset projects, that also empower people through prosperity by including some microfinance aspect. The second one, if we could click on the next one, is a roadmap. So in order to understand the emissions, we take the consumption of electricity across the locations and GHG emissions by scope, and we can map an approach to covering those emissions. As you can see on the bottom of the right-hand side image, we're going from 70% renewable energy coverage to 90% based on the consumption across different geographies. Next, please. The green team. So one of the most energetic groups within most organizations, a grassroots bottom-up group, is the green team, and they're very eager to learn and interested in these topics. So lunch and learn and webinar presentations are a great way to engage, and we have participated in many of those. It's best when they're recorded and then hosted on internal websites so that they can be accessed at any time. Next one. Events. So there are many different ways that you can do events, from an Earth Day event where we will come and do a table, or you have lots of other local vendors and sustainability vendors coming in, to engaging the senior executives here. This organization, Brambles, had a carbon neutral board meeting. So they are the parent company of CHEP, a leader in pallet and container pooling solutions. They've been carbon neutral for a while, and I think it was just last week they received an Environmental Initiative of the Year award at an Industrial Pack conference. So they, by having a carbon neutral board meeting, put this front and center in front of all of their governors. If we could go to the next one, please. Blogs and internal posters. This is an example of translating what 1 ton of carbon means. It was used by Wilmot Dixon. They're a privately owned contracting and interior fit-out group in the UK with over £1 billion in annual turnover. And they have done a lot of work, including going into the next tactic, which is, if we could go to the next one, project visits. So Wilmot Dixon have done this, Grundon, one of the UK's leading suppliers of integrated waste management, and Microsoft have also visited many of the projects, and that's a great opportunity. Some people do employee competitions and the winner can go and visit a project. We can take videos and pictures and write stories about this. The final one is employee action. Some companies have taken the additional step of extending their carbon purchase to enable their employees to purchase offsets from the same project, which is a great way to take action. In summary, it's not one communication strategy that will get everyone on board. You need to have a variety of engagement tools. And with that, I'll hand over to the next. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saskia, for that overview. We've had some questions come in already, and we'll go through them at the end, so please do keep them coming in. For now, I will hand over to Solitaire, who will dive a bit deeper into the psychology of engagement and empowerment with some real-life examples.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for the chance to come on and talk. So I won't say too much about Futerra. We're a change agency, and we're dedicated towards making sustainable development desirable and normal. And for sustainable development, read the entirety of the SDGs. Now, I know we're going to talk about climate action today, so I'm going to really try to use examples, some of which are for climate action, some of which aren't, but try to relate them all to climate action. Can I have the next slide, please? So the first thing that I want to just note for all of us, and everybody on this call will be aware of it, is how the sustainability conversation has evolved. Now, I've been working in positive change for 30 years, right from I began campaigning, but I've been running a business in sustainability for the last 17. And even in those 17 years, I've seen the message, the positioning, and the internal response to sustainability and climate action really change. So where you spend your money, sustainability as a cost center, philanthropy, areas where this is seen as giving back, that message has changed to being about how you make it. What is our product offering? How are we actually reaching the opportunities and positioning? How are we using sustainability to sell? We've moved from managing past impact, very much a looking backwards, reporting, talking about the statistics and facts of what we did do, to creating future opportunities. So how are we actually going to drive forward, manage risk, but also crucially enhance opportunity? From less bad to more good. This is very much the net positive sense. And when it comes to climate, and I know that Interface will be talking to this much more, when it comes to climate particularly, less bad doesn't feel like as energizing a message as it did. Simply cutting carbon rather than finding ways to reframe carbon. The John Elkington and the Covestro folks did some great work on this with carbon productivity. So actually find ways that to do more good. Obviously, all the work that's being done on drawdown is a great example of that. And of course, sustainability has always been the right thing to do. And there's a lot of conversation about this is a responsibility, this is a morality, this is in our DNA, through to being the smart thing to do. One of my colleagues, Freya Williams, wrote the wonderful book Green Giants about the $1 billion opportunity. Now, you're going to get a lot of that kind of cheerleading from me, because I find that when I engage with internal audiences, climate, carbon can seem far away, it can seem distant, it can seem risky, and it can feel like a duty, that it is a duty. Now, let's be blunt, I think it is. It is a duty for us to manage this, but duties do not a compelling business case make. So let's talk about some ways in which we can energize this and energize our colleagues. Next slide, please. Futerra has a theory of change of the 4 things required to bring about fundamental change on any topic inside your organization. First is a vision. You have to have a clear case for change, know where you're going, what you're trying to achieve. Now, what we're finding in climate action, that used to be about sort of CDP reduction type targets. We still see a lot of those, but increasingly we're seeing the sort of future fit, the scientific relevant targets, the big bold, audacious goals around climate, RE100, etc., setting some very clear visions from H&M going climate positive, etc., to really try to set what good looks like on climate action. However, those visions are often really passionate and engaging and ambitious, but you then need a strong roadmap for how to get there, because if no action happens, the visions simply remain on paper. You need an action plan, you need to report, you need to manage data, you need to have the governance and the policy to get there. And for most of us working in sustainability, we spend most of our time in maps. However, that's all the logic. That's the logic of climate action. And I think what we're on the call today to do is to talk about the magic a bit more. The symbols and the stories. The symbols is the positioning, the brand planning, the semiotic of how you talk about this, how you talk about climate action. And then the stories is that creative. How do you engage people? How do you take them with you? What are the communications and the behavior change? And I think it's so interesting that people acknowledged that the biggest challenge was getting anyone to do something. And it's in the maps and stories area where you actually get people to take action. Next slide, please. So there's a few things that make any internal sustainability engagement work, and particularly on climate action. Next slide, please. So this is an example from Aldi. This is Aldi and me. So my first point is to make something relevant to the people internally. When it comes to sustainability and climate action, it's not like we're trying to launch a new accounting practice. It's not like we're trying to get people to fill in their timesheets in a different way. This is something that people have a pre-existing set of views and opinions on. Their kids have spoken to them about climate change. They've watched TV programs about it. Some people are going to have very strong, passionate views around what we should do, what we shouldn't do, whether it matters, whether it doesn't matter. So what we did with Aldi was actually focus how to make fairness, locality, healthy, local sourcing, carbon management relevant to the staff. And Aldi took the very brave decision of actually allowing the staff to decide what the sustainability program would do. So there was it wasn't an entire free-for-all, but there was a set of options that the staff collectively decided between them how to take action, from where philanthropy money was going to go, to where innovation was going to go, to what to do actually in stores. And what they found is there's a very big difference between telling people what to do on climate action and asking what they think is valuable to do. Because what we found is by asking people what they thought was valuable to do, getting them to vote on where action was going to happen, radically increased the likelihood that they would take action. Next slide, please. Infrastructure. So this is on recycling, but it goes across any aspect of sustainability action. Which is one of the most common barriers is the action actually available to me? Can I do it? Is it easy to use? And how is it perceived? So working with McDonald's in the US, on the west coast of US, and with Stanford University, we actually decided to test recycling. So this is in store. We know that recycling in offices is also a really big challenge. So we tested different ways of communicating. You'll see that there is, on the left, there's an example of pride. So really focusing on the fact that San Francisco is the best American city at recycling and composting. On the right, you'll see something which was about use of emotion. So we anthropomorphized the bin from the little tiny empty bin that doesn't want too much in it through to the magic recycling bin and the hungry bin. And these kind of messages, from pride to emotion, were much more effective than what I think most of us would see, which is guilt. Please recycle. This is how you recycle. Look at the mountains of stuff we don't recycle. We've shown over years that those guilt-inducing messages don't tend to work, whereas these pride and emotion messages do. Next slide, please. So social proof. One of the most powerful ways to get people to do something is to show people doing something. You don't want any of this climate action to seem unusual. We often make the big mistake in climate action of saying not enough people are doing something, or we need more people to do something. All of your audiences here is, oh, this isn't what we do around here. Not enough people are doing it. I therefore I'm not going to do it. What you want is to really engage people with the fact that this is happening, and it's happening, it's desirable, join a success, get on the bus, this is the way everyone's going. So the Mackay Awards for SAB Miller, we did the whole SAB Miller prospect work from the logic to the campaign. And the Mackay Awards one, it's named after their previous CEO who passed away, were fantastic internal Dragon's Den. So they ran across the whole business a Dragon's Den program of asking people to invent ways to improve the sustainability performance of the company. And the actual idea that ended up winning, as well as developing the campaign, I also was chair of the judges. The campaign that ended up winning was that the grain used in developing beer actually ends up coming out the other side, not tasting of beer, but having an increased protein content compared to the grain that goes into the beer making process. That grain, then the winning Mackay Award project, was turned into bread that could be sold. It ended up reducing waste, reducing carbon footprint, and increasing the health of the communities nearby by selling an increased protein content bread. Fantastic project. Actually ended up making some money. This massively increases the desirability of climate action. It's no longer a duty or a responsibility, it's a game I can win. So the Mackay Awards brought in a sense of mystery, a sense of energy, a sense of competitiveness inside the company. Next slide, please. So some of you outside of the UK might not recognise Nando's. Those of you in the UK and indeed South Africa will recognise Nando's. It's a chicken restaurant. So this is an audience of very young, often very short-term employees. A lot of the folks who work in the Nando's restaurants, they are not there for a lifelong career. They're students, they might be passing through. Very, very hard audience to convince on a sustainability issue. There's a lot of cynicism. There was a lot of not believing the messages that were pushed down. And so actually what we did was provided ownership and responsibility. We invited some of those young people, those kids working in the restaurants, to actually do investigative journalism inside. We sent them to an abattoir. We sent them to a chicken farm. They created their own internal messaging about, in this case, chicken, but also about climate action and about waste. And it was one of the most successful internal campaigns that Nando's had ever done, because rather than telling staff what to do, they were allowing staff to communicate to each other. So peer-to-peer communications, that sense of agency, that you're empowering your staff to tell each other. Next slide, please. So 4 simple takeaways. 1, answer the question, what's in it for me? Are you giving the relevance and the opportunity for your staff members to actually have their say? Infrastructure, is it available? Is it easy to use? How is your internal communications perceived? Social proof, can you show people that people are taking action? The more common, the more social proof, the more familiar this feels to people, then it means that your staff will be doing the communication job for you. And finally, agency, how many ways can you think of to give ownership and responsibility, basically to pass power on rather than holding it yourself? That was a very swift run through. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Solitaire. That was fantastic and offers some amazing insight and actually a very colourful and visual explanation. You're clearly practicing what you preach in terms of communication. I really like that Nando's example, especially in terms of that empowerment and peer-to-peer communication message, I think is a key one. So hopefully some of our audience members can relate to those examples and are inspired to take similar action in their own companies. So with that, I will now hand over to Nadine, who will share Interface's story.
Hello, everyone. It is such a pleasure to join you today and share a few insights and stories from the Interface experience. If I could get the next slide, that would be wonderful. Thank you. I feel like many of you participating in the webinar may already be familiar with some of our background in history. This is an image of Interface's founder, Ray Anderson. And I want to include the slide just as a reminder that our sustainability journey, our climate action story, really began about 24 years ago when Ray was inspired to take interface on a very different path and challenged himself and the company to become a model of sustainability. And his experience of transformation, he would describe as a bit of a spear in the chest kind of story. And I think what's important here is a little bit of reflection on the ability of leadership to engage more broadly across the organization. A number of folks over the last 20 plus years have studied the transformation of interface around sustainability and have emphasized the need to focus on engaging hearts and minds when it comes to doing this work. And what that meant for interface was a lot of conversation, face-to-face, human-to-human. Employees tell us that it was important for the CEO to invite them to be a part of this journey. What we called Mission Zero, our company's promise to eliminate any negative environmental impact by the year 2020. Something that also came out of research that's been done on interfaces transformation includes actively giving people permission to pursue ideas, change. In the early days, we did include strategies like competitions among the different factories around the world as we began to track our progress towards zero footprint, having incentives and bonus programs in place for employees to suggest their best ideas, and they were rewarded for sharing ideas and having them implemented. But studies have shown that what's been more powerful is having a purposeful journey that people feel they're a part of. The incentives, the bonuses have great sort of short-term benefits, but for ongoing engagement, this link to a more purposeful journey, actively talking about it through face-to-face, human-to-human interactions has been a very, very valuable insight that we've learned along the way. Given the transformative nature of the journey, going from, sort of a take, make, waste model of manufacturing flooring to one based on circular models, really committing to becoming a model of sustainability and running a business in a way that eliminates waste and emissions and processed water in manufacturing requires a new lens. So we did invest in programming to help support the development of a new lens with employees, running workshops in the factories on practices and methodologies like biomimicry. How do we look to nature, the natural world, for solutions to some of our biggest design challenges? In the early days, our framework for our Mission Zero journey was highly based on frameworks like the natural step. And so having workshops on frameworks like the natural step, systems thinking, supporting the development of a new lens among all employees was a really important aspect of internal engagement around our sustainability journey. If we could have the next slide, that would be wonderful. And I think we're reminded by tools like the Denison Culture Survey. I'm often asked, what sorts of tools do you use to measure engagement? The Denison Culture Survey has a number of different focus areas, including one on purpose, and we score very, very highly in this area specific to the survey, with employees noting how important our purpose is to their job, understanding it, feeling connected to it. These are things that we are measuring, like I said, through tools like the Denison Culture Survey. And this is an image of one of our teams at our facility in Thailand, which experiences super high levels of engagement. And the reason why I wanted to share this slide in particular was a reminder of meeting people where they are. And also, I think giving permission to opt in to this journey. It's not like it was ever really forced down. But I think being mindful of cultural differences around the world and understanding what works for the different business teams regionally, understanding context and being respectful and mindful of that is really important. One story we like to share is we, at our facility in the Netherlands, for example, have this wonderful strategy in place where machine operators at their machines, whether it's tufting or backing, there's a poster attached to their machine, and employees are invited to share their thoughts on how to make their machine more efficient, and they're encouraged to document that. It's very public, it's very open, and within 24 hours, the expectation is that their supervisor or manager would respond to the idea, and the sort of back and forth is documented on this poster at the machine. And if, you know, depending on the nature of the idea, it will get elevated to senior leadership and implemented and rewarded. And so some of these strategies work really well in certain parts of the world and not so much in others. So like, for example, we tried that strategy in the US and it really didn't go anywhere. But so all of this just is a reminder of being, I think, culturally sensitive and being mindful of regional contexts. If I could get the next slide, that would be wonderful. In 2015, our new CEO joined us, and it was a really interesting opportunity to kind of challenge ourselves to think about what's next. One of the first questions he asked us was, what do we have left to do to be successful in 2020? And this inspired us to map out a gap to goal exercise, and some of the metrics that were surfacing gave us a lot of confidence to sort of explore what's next. But it also forced us to get laser focused on the work that we have left to do to achieve Ray's original vision of zero footprint in 2020. So this led to specific goals around getting our factories to zero, suppliers to zero, our products to zero footprint. But I think at the bottom line of all of this is that people are at the heart, are central to making this happen. The story is fundamentally about people. And I think some of the lessons learned have included having systems in place within the organization for ideas to flow. So encouraging idea sharing, but then also ensuring that when employees are sharing ideas, that there is an acknowledgement, there's a response, because the best way to kill an idea is to not acknowledge and respond. So that's one thing that we've absolutely learned. We're also committing to expanding some really powerful programming that's been tested in other parts of the organization. For example, in Europe, we've had for more than 10 years, a sustainability ambassadors program, which culminates in proposing an internal action research project to affect change in your department. And these proposals are presented to senior leadership, and those that are successful are actually funded and implemented within the organization. And we're currently looking at how to expand that kind of program globally. So there's an implicit expectation around internal change and entrepreneurship. Next slide, please. Another important exercise that we took on in 2015 as we developed the confidence to pursue what's next and explore what's beyond Mission Zero was really checking in internally and asking employees for their feedback. We ran focus groups, interviews, surveys with employees across the organization. And it was really interesting to see some key themes emerge from that. We heard a lot from employees around the next step in our mission needs to be just as ambitious, and it needs to feel impossible, just like Mission Zero did. It needs to be bigger than us, bigger than interface our supply chain and really have an impact on making positive change in the world, and that it was time for us to take a more aggressive stance on the biggest issues facing humanity, like global climate change. Next slide, please. And so if we could jump to the next slide, please, that would be great. Thank you. We actually had a wonderful opportunity to partner with Solly and her team at Futerra, and really take some of the feedback that we heard from employees. We also looked externally. We reconvened our Eco Dream team of external advisors to really challenge our level of ambition, challenge our thinking. And this next step in our mission is really about taking on a bit of a different mindset, going beyond just doing less harm and challenging ourselves to do more good and get some clarity on what that might mean. And so in 2016, we convinced our new CEO to launch the next step, which is really about challenging ourselves to run our business in a way that helps to reverse global warming, and feeling very inspired by a more positive narrative to create a climate fit for life and get us focused on the kind of climate future that we want to be a part of, that we want to contribute to. And so employee feedback was a huge part in setting this next step for us. Next slide, please. So going from eliminating emissions, eliminating carbon footprint, going beyond carbon neutral products to reversal and radical decarbonization, really led us to focus in on these 4 elements. Live Zero is really a continuation of Mission Zero, but Love Carbon is this fundamental rethinking of our relationship with carbon and looking to it as a resource instead of a liability. Let Nature Cool is really about getting out of nature's way and letting her regulate the climate and supporting her ability to serve as a carbon sink. And so right now we have a very huge focus. We launched this externally, and now we're catching up and launching it internally. And so a lot of my focus these days is on reconnecting as a global organization, exploring what climate take back means, its relationship to Mission Zero, kind of celebrating our evolving journey. And we're being reminded of what's worked in the past, being mindful of local contexts, giving permission for people to opt in, creating the systems for ideas to flow and be rewarded, and helping people develop a new lens. So this shift from doing less harm to doing more good, working towards being a positive business together, engaging with hearts and minds. I will pause there and look forward to questions as they come in. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful, Nadine. Thank you very much for that. The poster on the machine story was very interesting in relation to employee rewards as well. And a couple of key points I took away was the adapting your sustainability communications for different cultural contexts, as well as the employee feedback you take on board as well. And we'll come back to that, I'm sure, during the Q&A. We've already had a few questions come in on that. So with that, I will hand over to the final panelist, Natasha, who will run through VMware's story.
All right, well, I'm excited to share our story. So I'm going to focus on our path to carbon neutrality. And I'll start first by just giving a high-level overview of VMware. I often say that it's the biggest tech company that no one's heard of, because we sit deep inside pretty much everybody's IT infrastructure. So we have over 500,000 customers. We're a global company. These are 2016 numbers on the screen, but we did 7.1 billion in revenue. And the thing to highlight here is one of the exciting things about VMware is that we like to talk about what you could call our handprint, which we've calculated as the carbon avoided by our customers. So in 2016, that number was 76 million metric tons avoided by our customers, and that's 415 million metric tons since the founding of our company. So we're super excited about that, and it's juxtaposed beside our carbon footprint, which is relatively small. I just mentioned that because we are a software company, so we definitely started with the conversation of why does this matter to us? And as a software company in the IT sector, where should we start and what should we focus on? Next slide, please. So I'm going to go back to 2016, where we took a step back and we wanted to revision what sustainability should look like at VMware going forward. And that was really the first time that we worked on publicly stating goals for the future and doing sustainability reporting, including disclosing our carbon footprint, et cetera. So we really wanted to set very bold and ambitious goals to demonstrate leadership and to really move the needle. So you can see here that as part of our planet goals, we committed to carbon neutrality, and along with that, procuring 100% renewable energy by 2020. So then we had to figure out, how do we get there? You know, companies have different approaches. I've heard this several times. They either set the target and then figure out how to get there, or they figure out how to get there and then set the target. Well, we did the former. So we had this goal, and then we had to figure out how we were going to achieve this goal. So you can go to the next slide, please. So one thing I want to mention, just because it gets sort of lost as we begin to talk about how we get to carbon neutrality and, you know, purchasing carbon offsets and renewable energy instruments. Of course, before all of that, our plan to get to carbon neutrality includes optimizing for energy efficiency across our portfolio. We have global sites around the world, so we have a significant real estate footprint there, mostly office space. It is mostly leased, so we do not have a lot of control. So we do whatever we can. Additionally, we look at, you know, on-site solar where it makes sense, purchasing PPAs where it makes sense, direct green power, etc. So after all of that, and as you can imagine, that's just an ongoing process. It's part of our operations now to, you know, review all of these things on an ongoing basis and continue to really decrease our carbon footprint. So once we work on that, then we have to figure out, okay, how do we take care of the rest, right? And I didn't mention business travel, but that is in there too, operationally trying to address all of our scope 3. So next slide, please. So one of our major milestones, I would say, in our carbon neutrality journey was making it real, was putting something very tangible on paper. So Natural Capital Partners was hugely helpful in this effort. And this is just a snapshot, high level, of what that looks like. But it's a very detailed plan that shows, you know, for each site in each location, what energy instrument would we need or would be required to achieve 100% renewable energy per the RE100 standards. And then when it comes to carbon neutrality, as you can imagine, there are lots of questions out there about, well, what does that mean? What do you include? And it became apparent pretty quickly that we wanted to use a standard that was transparent and credible. So we decided to go for the carbon neutral certification from Natural Capital Partners. So all of a sudden, we had this very tangible plan. This enabled us and empowered us to have conversations internally with groups like finance, who prior to having this roadmap, you know, would ask, well, what's it going to take? And, you know, we sort of had our, you know, I was going to say, lick your finger, put it on the board if you could see me. But now we have real numbers. So we know what those numbers are. We know exactly what it's going to cost us, so that we can budget, which gave a lot of comfort to the organization, including the real estate teams, who we've now embedded the price for our renewable energy credits and our energy attribute credits overseas to put in their budgets. So we actually put these in the budgets for the next 3 years, and really therefore put a price on carbon in our organization. So this has been an amazing tool. That's gotten us a lot of traction and really given us, you know, somewhat of a leash. Once people bought into this, we could sort of, you know, run. So next slide, please. So then this is where it gets, I'm going to say interesting, and yes, I'll just say it, challenging. So communicating carbon neutrality. Honestly, this is probably one of the toughest areas for us, because there are a lot of different ways to get there, and they're all important, and everybody has their reasons for doing different things. But there's very little fine print out there. So it's difficult to compare apples to apples. So we, again, are really excited about using the carbon neutral certification that we can clearly articulate. We can talk about what's included in our scope 3, what we're offsetting, and again, it's fully transparent. The other thing I'll mention here is just that, and I think this came up earlier from Saskia, there are lots of different ways to communicate, right? And you reach different audiences. So this is our internal, actually this is our external channel, but our VMware channel. And this is where we've produced a couple of blogs. So our communication strategy was really to, release information over time and really in bite-sized chunks, because I think our first go at it, we tried to explain, our entire carbon neutral strategy and what that meant, and go into energy instruments, and really it was like a 101 course. So that wasn't going to work. So we've done bite-sized pieces. We've done a couple blogs here. Natural Capital Partners has done some blogs and referenced us. So that's been great. We also did a lunch and learn with Natural Capital Partners, and the takeaway there was that you need to keep it really simple. This is not everyday language for most people. So getting something that really resonates with people is so important. And I know we're running up against time, but I'm going to spend about another minute on the next slide. So this is our Guatemala project, and this is a project that we're doing. This is a carbon offset project that we're super excited about. We're working with Natural Capital Partners on, offsetting our scopes 1 and 3 with low carbon sustainable development projects. And we're about to visit Guatemala in a couple of weeks. And one of the reasons we're so excited about this project is because we think there are so many aspects that will resonate with our organization. And also, speaking of alignment, I know Saskia mentioned that the alignment for us with this project in Guatemala is its impact. So at VMware, we care very much about the impact that we're having. For example, going back to the footprint that I mentioned earlier. So for this project in Guatemala, and another thing here is the way that we've decided to message it. So we loved this message of carbon finance, a bridge to sustainability. So by us supporting this project in Guatemala, there are multiple co-benefits for that project. For example, bringing clean water to the rural poor in Guatemala and really changing the landscape there. And then obviously for VMware, it brings its benefits, the least of which is probably getting to carbon neutrality for our scope 3, our business travel emissions. So I know we're up against time, so I'll close there, and I look forward to any questions.
Thanks very much, Natasha. That was great. And I think that it is important to have a clear target and the roadmap and plan laid out with those milestones. Really enables the internal staff to see the value. And then, as you said, they can budget for it and get more engaged. So that is we've had our 4 presentations, and it's almost time to begin the Q&A. But first, we'd like to run our final audience poll. So you should see that on your screens shortly. The question is, how do you plan to communicate to and engage internal staff in your climate action program over the next few months? So how are you going to communicate to your internal staff? Is that online? Maybe you have internal newsletters. Maybe you have a social networking site such as Yammer. Some people have intranets. Perhaps you're running an internal webinar or session. Perhaps it's live in person. Maybe you have an annual environmental day, sustainability day, lunch and learn, as Natasha just mentioned, or a meeting. Some companies, larger companies in particular, choose to have role models, champions or ambassadors who have put their hand up to volunteer. They're particularly keen on sustainability and helping with sustainability in the organization as it is. Some people choose to have posters, logos or infographics in various key locations in the office or around the factories of the company. And also discussed today was making it part of companies' performance reviews or running a competition for staff, so having incentives in that way. So we've had quite a few responses come in already, so I think we'll be able to close the poll now, and I'll just show the results. So very interesting. Most say they're going to communicate online. Yeah, perhaps a lot of you have internal newsletters there, and of course that is a quick and easy way to get the message across. More than half are going to be hosting an in-person event of some kind, which is pretty good going. Quite a lot have role models, and others are going to be having physical messages in the office, and also making incentives part of the program as well. So very interesting, and perhaps our panelists can give a little comment on that as well. So we've had quite a few questions come in, so I'm going to direct them to the panelists one by one. Just choosing the first one. I think this one will probably best go to Solitaire. There is one on greenwashing and how can you avoid greenwashing? And I assume this applies to internal and external communications, but of course, in terms of internal communications today. So how do you avoid greenwashing?
I think it's a great question, because most people think of greenwashing as being external, but actually your internal audiences are the most likely to be cynical and to ask the hard questions. So one of the big ways to avoid greenwashing is obviously humility and accuracy, and preventing marketing teams getting overexcited and running away with small issues. Another big way to avoid greenwashing is to ask rather than tell. So to ask people what they think and provide them information to allow them to actually feedback to you. So to make it's much harder to greenwash when you're in a conversation than if you're in a broadcast.
Great, thanks for that. So someone has asked a question, will the recording be made available? Yes, it will. You'll be sent the recording of this webinar afterwards. So I think I will ask the next question to Nadine. So obviously you're an international company. Did you have to adapt your internal sustainability communications to every single country? So I guess that's a question of workload in terms of communication. You know, was it driven by the headquarters, and then you sort of translated it into the different cultures that you operate in, or was it an individual message for each country?
Thank you for the question. Up until very recently, a lot of the communications were translated locally. So we have local teams who really manage translation into local languages on their own. And in the last couple of years, as we've launched some more globally consistent activations and tactics, like for example, this year we're launching our first global onboarding program. Onboarding with new hires had always sort of been managed locally. We are now offering e-learning modules, which contain sort of background history, overview of a number of things, including our sustainability journey. And we are having these e-learning programs translated into our 9 primary languages around the world. So we are starting to do more of that more centrally. But again, it sort of depends on the project, but we are starting to do more of the translation, offering that centrally and making that available to the regions versus having them do their own. But for a long time, it was handled more locally.
That's wonderful. Thanks for that, Nadine. So we've got a question come in, and I think it could probably go to any one of our panelists, but I'll direct it at Natasha. What one piece of advice would you give to other companies seeking to achieve similar goals and engaging their employees in the journey? I know you said keep it simple was one of your tips, but sorry, I probably answered your question there. I'll leave it open to you.
No, I would say keep it simple. And actually, I think I would also say, given that sustainability teams are small and mighty, and generally don't have a ton of resources, I think this topic in particular, why I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to organize my thoughts around it, it's a tricky one to talk about. It's hard to communicate some of these things to a general audience. So my advice is to leverage your partnerships and really, you know, help to get the language, and so that you can address all of the questions that come up. We get questions all of the time about why we're purchasing Rex, or how does this make sense, or what's Facebook doing? And I can't stay on top of all of that stuff all of the time. So I rely heavily on our partners, particularly one of them that is on the phone. So I thank Saskia.
Thanks very much, Natasha. So we're up against the hour. So I'll just ask Saskia one final question. Saskia, you mentioned climate goals, you know, carbon neutral, renewable energy, sustainable development goals. Have you found with your clients that one of these is makes it easier to engage staff and engage stakeholders?
Yeah, well, I think the framework of the sustainable development goals makes a very good. It's a very good tool to engage employees and other stakeholders, and to engage clients who we've been working with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so with that, I'm to end the webinar. Of course, we did have some questions unanswered, and we will attempt to, well, we will answer them after this webinar. And you can see the panelist emails on the screen now if you have any further questions. Thank you all once again for attending and asking questions, and thank you to our speakers for their presentations. I hope you as the audience have been able to take away a couple of helpful tips today. And this webinar recording will be available on our website. So feel free to share it with your colleagues. We will also send it to you. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.